Okay, so basically what we have here is here's our rod grinder, and this looks a little bit complicated, but actually it's not. Let me step over here. So we've broken the connecting rod into two pieces and removed the bolts and the nuts, and we're left with the upper half of the connecting rod, and we're left with the cap. So since when these made up, it creates a circle that is the area that rides on the crankshaft. There's a bearing that rides in between the rod and the crankshaft. But we know these are out of specification, so what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to our rod grinder. We're going to open up our little T-clamp right here. We're going to install the cap and push it against the stone, just like that, and lock the cap in place. And then we're going to back the table off away from the stone. And then we're going to rock back and forth and remove material off of the rod cap. Not a lot, maybe a thousandths or two, and get a good clean surface. Now I'll do this on one rod, but I'm going to do all four rods. I don't necessarily want to show you all of that on video, but we'll do one complete rod, and then we'll go in there and discuss what happens after we grind these caps. So here we go. We're going to make a light pass on the cap. So here's kind of what happens. Let me see if I can zoom in here so you can see what's going on here. Okay, so if you see this area here, you'll see two shiny surfaces. Those are mating surfaces. If you compare it to the rod, you can kind of see how clean and flat they are compared to the connecting rod. Okay, so we'll get four clean mating surfaces that are perfectly flat. So we'll move on to setting the rod up and getting it. Okay, so now you can see there's four fresh mating surfaces, so that when we collapse these under torque, that they've got a nice flat surface to sit on. But there's a few things we need to discuss. So when we grind these flats back into the cap and the rod, what is actually happening is that we're removing material from both of those surfaces. So now when we bolt the rod up, the rod is no longer round. It's egg-shaped. And we can't have an egg-shaped bearing rod riding on a round shaft like the crankshaft, because it'll destroy the crankshaft. So but the only way to correct that is to remove material from these four surfaces and make the whole egg shape. Then we'll put the bolts back in and torque them under specifications. Then we'll go to the rod hone, and we'll hone this material out and make it round again, but we have to hone it to the specifications listed in the technical manual. So I'm not going to bore you with all four of these. I'll do the other three off camera. But we'll meet back when I get the other three completed, and we'll move on to the home. So stand by. Okay, so we're back in the clean room here, and we've ground all four of the rods and all four of the caps, and you can kind of see how clean that surface is there. Two flat mating surfaces, and that's a good starting point for these rods. So there's rod number 3, and so on and so forth. I mean, they're all in pretty good shape. But so now what we got to do, since we've got flat mating surfaces where both of these connect, now we have to take this hole that is egg shaped, and we have to turn it into a round hole, a perfectly round hole within the TM specifications. So what we'll do is we'll reassemble the rods, put the rod bolts back in it, and we'll torque the bolts down to specifications. Then I'll go out and set the rod hone up off camera and get it ready to show you how we hone these rods out to specifications. So just stand by. Okay, so we're at the sun and rod hone, and there's quite a bit going on with this machine, so I don't know that I want to get too in depth, because I think your basic machinist probably understands the principle, but I'll go in a little bit of detail for those of you who are not machinists. So the way this works is there's a mandrel here with a stone on it. Now I'll see if I can zoom in so you can see the stone. So here's what the stone looks like removed, and it's just a shoe with a stone glued to it. And I have a foot pedal down here hooked to a chain, and there's a control mechanism that moves through this body here and controls the stone. So when I push the foot pedal down, this stone expands outward inside the rod hone. Okay. Now over here is the measuring device that I use to measure the rods. Okay, so this device has pins located right here, and those pins are adjustable to fit whatever diameter rod I need it to fit. So you screw the knob out here and the pins contract, but expand and contract. But as they expand and contract, they show up on this dial indicator here, and this dial indicator is measured in graduations of 10,000ths of an inch. So I can really get precise with this machine, but it has its drawbacks, and I'll get into those as we hone. But so what I've done here is I have taken a set of a measuring device, and I have dialed in to the maximum allowable tolerance on the rod, which is 2 inches 44 thousandths, and I've set it in between these pins right here until my gauge registers 0. Now on the gauge you'll see a green band and a red band. See if I can get you in a little bit closer. Okay, so that measures how out around the rod is, but it also measures when I get to the size that I set it to. It lets me know when the needle hits 0 that I am at the dimension that I set the pins to. So the way this works is I'm going to hone out this connecting rod. So I'm going to hone out the connecting rod, and as I hone it, I will pull it off and take it to the AG9000, and we'll measure how out around it is and how much more material I have to remove to get to the dimension I set it to, which is 2 inches 0.44 thousandths. All right, so inside the rod, obviously if you're if you're a machinist and you're watching this video, you know what's happening here. But for those of you who don't, I have painted the inside of the rod with machinist ink. And I'm going to send it down this stone and start to remove material. And we'll pull it off, and you can see how out around the rod is, because as the stone goes around, it will remove all of the dye off of the high spots and will leave the low spots. And eventually we want to end up with no ink inside this rod, but we have to end up at our final dimension. We can't go over. So these machines have a tendency to, because you have to move the rod in and out on the mandrel, they have a tendency to put a taper in the rod. So what I've done is put a yellow mark on one side of the rod, and I will move it in and out over the mandrel 5 or 6 times. Then I'll flip it and do 5 or 6 more strokes until most of the ink comes out. So the yellow dot is just a way for me to track how many times and which side of the rod has been honed. So I'm going to move the camera and we'll get started. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get too awful close for you, but I'll do the best I can for those of you who are interested. So stand by. All right, so here we go. I'm going to try to do this without blocking the view. All right, so there's another shot of the machinist ink, so you can see that it's all the way around the bore. So I'm going to start with the yellow side up, and I've got oil pouring on this mandrel to keep everything cool. So I'm going to press on the pedal, and the more I press on the pedal, the further the stone comes out. The further the stone comes out, the more material is removed. Okay, so there's just a few strokes. So if you look inside, you can see a little bit of red ink in there left over, and that is material that has not yet been removed. So I know that if I take this over to the measuring device and measure it, that my rod is going to be out around. See if we can get it so you can see what's going on here. I'm not going to be able to show both things at one time, but I'll try to move back and forth best I can. Alright, so we're going to place our rod on our measuring device, and I can see, if you can see the needle, it's in the red, and it's showing me that there is 2 thousandths interference fit, which means this hole is a 1/2 thousandths out around, but it's also 2 thousandths too small.